From outright professional bans on teachers who used blackboards in class to smartphone bans in schools, where digital skills are supposed to be taught. Introducing new media into education is rarely easy and almost never free of resistance and criticism. In this video, we take a brief journey through time, starting with the days of the philosopher Socrates and continuing to the present day. We look at the absurd and sometimes rather bizarre reactions that the use of new media in education has triggered. Let's begin our journey with one of the oldest and arguably most important educational media of all, writing itself. Over 2,400 years ago, it had long been part of everyday life in ancient Greece. It was the ultimate tool for recording and passing on knowledge. But not everyone saw this as progress. Quite the contrary. Socrates, one of the most famous philosophers, was very critical of writing. He feared that writing would weaken memory and distract people from thinking for themselves. Knowledge, he believed, arose from lively conversation, not from symbols on papyrus. Written words could not answer questions, explain themselves, and above all, take responsibility for what they claimed. They only appeared to be alive. Ironically, we only know all this today because his student Plato wrote down Socrates' criticism in the dialogue Phaedrus. Let's now return to the present. The debate about writing is strikingly reminiscent of today's discussions about digital media and the fears that technology will replace independent thinking. Something to think about to close this chapter. Among other things, Socrates criticized writing for not providing answers. What would he have thought of ChatGPT? Would he have seen it as progress or exactly what he always warned against? From ancient times, we now take a big leap forward to the late 18th and early 19th century. During this period, a medium was introduced that is now an indispensable part of every classroom, the blackboard. It is not possible to say with certainty when exactly the blackboard was first used. Some sources cite the year 1760, others mention 1801. One thing is certain: sometime during this period, the blackboard found its way into the classroom and changed it profoundly. Suddenly, teaching was no longer a one-way street. In other words, a lecture by a person at the front of the classroom. Instead, it became a social and communicative process. The blackboard made it possible to work on and discuss content together. But not everyone was enthusiastic about its introduction. When the first teachers began working with large blackboards, they encountered fierce resistance, so strong that it actually led to outright professional bans. Seems hard to believe today, right? Let's look at another blackboard-related story from Yale University in the USA in 1830. At that time, it was customary for students to be allowed to use their textbooks for geometry problems, even during exams. The necessary geometric figures, for example for conic sections, were printed directly in the textbook. A mathematics professor wanted to try something new and introduced the blackboard, both in lectures and in exams. Students were now required to draw the figures on the blackboard from memory and without using a book. This was not well received. The majority of students refused to take the exam. They went on strike. The university reacted harshly. Over 40 students, almost half of the entire class, were expelled. The incident went down in history as the Conic Sections Rebellion. We can see that the blackboard did not have an easy start. Our journey continues. Perhaps you already have an idea what I'm going to talk about. Schools are closed. In-person classes are canceled. Chaotic homeschooling. Parents are caught between work and homework. Children who would rather be outside playing with their friends. Sounds familiar, right? But no, we haven't landed in 2020. It's actually 1937, and the name of the crisis is not COVID-19, but polio. In the fall of that year, a polio outbreak hit the city of Chicago with full force. The start of classes was postponed, but schools didn't want to give up on learning altogether. So the city launched a large-scale homeschooling project, probably the first of its kind. Over 300,000 students in grades 3 to 8 were to learn from home, not via video conferencing, as we did during the times of the coronavirus, but via radio. Lessons were broadcast daily, including mathematics, English, and science. There was a separate program for each grade level, which was broadcast on different stations. Local newspapers printed worksheets and parents became substitute teachers. However, practice quickly revealed the limitations of the whole system. Only about 60% of households even owned a radio at the time, while some parents set up multiple devices so that their children could follow the different programs for their respective grade levels in different rooms. Many families had no access to the lessons at all. This is a problem that has become all too familiar to us since the coronavirus pandemic. It was also a difficult time for teachers. Without direct contact to the children, they felt powerless, and many were afraid that this new technology would one day replace their profession. Almost 100 years later, we can see that the challenges have remained the same, only the underlying technology has changed. Finally, perhaps one more comment. Although radio never really established itself as an educational medium, learning via audio is currently experiencing a renaissance with podcasts. There is now a huge selection of formats on science and education in general. We now take a leap from analog educational media to the digital age. If, as we heard earlier, a blackboard could cause uproar and even lead to professional bans, then one can imagine the drama and scandals that ensued when computers were introduced into classrooms. Let's take a look at a particularly bizarre and alarming case that made headlines around the world and brought two issues to the forefront that are still highly relevant today: privacy and data protection. Alleged drug use by a 15-year-old which turned out to be just candy, and over 56,000 photos from students' private homes taken secretly using school laptops. Doesn't this sound like a real success story of digital transformation of schools? Sadly, this is not satire. This story actually took place in 2010 in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania. In the Lower Merion School District, around 2,300 high school students were given laptops. Intended to modernize teaching, the devices had special software pre-installed that, according to the school, was supposed to help locate lost or stolen laptops. But what no one suspected was that this software could secretly turn on the webcam and take photos without the students noticing. Over time, more than 56,000 photos were taken, many of them directly in the children's bedrooms or living rooms. The scandal came to light when a 15-year-old student was accused of using drugs. The alleged evidence was photos of him eating candy at home, which the school mistakenly believed to be illegal pills. His parents, of course, wondered how these images had been taken. This led to the discovery that the school had been secretly using laptop cameras to monitor students in their own homes. The case ended up in court and is still considered one of the most famous examples of how well-intentioned digital education projects can end in a privacy disaster. Today, the issue of privacy is more relevant than ever. With the increasing prevalence of AI-supported learning platforms and digital devices in the classroom, we are asking ourselves the same questions as back then, but on a much larger scale. Who controls the data that is collected? Who has access to it? And how can privacy be protected while enabling personalized learning with such tools? ChatGPT here, ChatGPT there. Yes, you really hear this term all the time these days, and for good reason. This tool is undoubtedly one of the most significant developments of the last few decades. It is hardly surprising that such a tool, especially when used in education, initially meets with criticism and resistance. However, initially is a flexible term here, as discussions started when it was released in 2022 and continue to the present day. A particularly noteworthy incident occurred at a university in Texas in 2023. A professor suspected that several papers had not been written by his students, but that ChatGPT had been used. To investigate his suspicions, he quickly created his own ChatGPT account. He then uploaded the papers there and asked the chatbot if it had written them. The chatbot replied several times that the respective texts were written by it. For the professor, that seemed to settle the matter. He gave the students a failing grade. The problem, however, is that ChatGPT cannot prove whether a text was created by it. The professor misinterpreted the answers as evidence and drew the wrong conclusions. Many of the accusations might have been unfounded. This incident highlights two key challenges. On the one hand, there is a risk that learners will rely entirely on ChatGPT and have their work created entirely by such tools, rather than using them only as a support. On the other hand, it is extremely difficult for teachers to ultimately prove beyond doubt that such tools have been used, and it is equally challenging to set clear limits for their permissible use. We have now reached the end of our brief journey through time, and we have arrived in the year 2025 in Austria. Since May 1st, 2025, a nationwide ban on cell phones has been in effect in schools up to and including the 8th grade. For all students aged 6 to 14, this means that cell phones must be turned off and put away in school buildings, and even during breaks. Unless, of course, they are explicitly needed for lessons. The cell phone ban is intended to make classrooms livelier places during breaks, promote social skills, and ensure the children's ability to focus increases, as explained by the Austrian Minister of Education when introducing these measures. Smartphones are certainly a major distraction, but is a ban really the right way to achieve these goals? International experience with cell phone bans paints a somewhat mixed picture. A study by the Anti-Bullying Centre in Ireland concludes that strict smartphone bans in schools often have only a limited effect and are perceived by students as an expression of mistrust. The researchers conclude that there is little international evidence to date that smartphone bans lead to better learning outcomes, less cyberbullying, or greater well-being in the long term. Interestingly, the study also showed that the stricter the cell phone ban, the more students attempt to find ways to circumvent it. Ultimately, only time will tell whether such a ban will really bring the hoped-for benefits. However, one thing is already clear. A cell phone ban seems paradoxical in today's digital world. Although the directive stipulates that smartphones may be used in subjects such as digital literacy, it remains questionable whether digital skills can be sufficiently promoted on smartphones when a general ban governs everyday school life. What do these stories show us? What should you take away from them? Technology and the media used in education are constantly evolving, from printed textbooks, radio and television, to tablets, learning apps, and smartphones in the classroom. Despite this ongoing development, one thing remains the same: people's fundamental skepticism toward change. Criticism and rejection are the constant companions of anything new.